Hello everyone and welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly. On the afternoon after, the Springboks proved that they had only been yarrowing their way through the summer like true Kerrymen, and they lit this tour up with a fantastic performance. Joining me to discuss it is Bernard Jackman. We've got to check in with you first and see what the hype level is like. You don't need to give me a number. I know you're not a man for gimmicks, Birch, but has your enthusiasm increased for the Test series in a strictly rugby context after that one last night?
I'm back, baby. I'm back. No, it's yeah, no, I loved it. I loved it. I thought it was the most fascinating game I've watched in a while. Obviously, look, there was some great final, like the Premiership final was class, but I just thought the intricacies and the tactics and the physicality of the Boks, that particularly that first 20 minutes when I thought maybe they'd start slow, having been locked in their bedrooms, and maybe that's, you know, it was just that outrage or release of emotion and pent up testosterone. But like, anybody near a ruck is in physical danger. I mean, most times they're more physical with their own players. So Les Kiss, the former Irish defence coach, used to always talk about, you know, two parts of the tackle. There's the front end and the back end. And I'd urge anyone who's watching the Boks to just keep an eye on the back end of the tackle that happens. Situations happens more against with them than anyone else, where they effectively will smash their own tackler mid tackle to create go forward, and it's just on a different level. And I think from Gatland's point of view, and you know, for the Lions coaches, there's a few clips in that game that, you know, will be used next week in the lead up to the first test around, you know, winning those physical battles and not being dominated. And the Boks laid down a marker, I thought, and I know the Lions fought back and everything, but I thought in terms of them leaving a mark on the Lions or putting it very clear in their mind around where the battle line is going to be, I just thought it was awesome. And they've got some, you know, some absolute animals to come in as well. I mean, yeah, it's going to be intriguing.
Yeah, let me say hello to Murray Kinsella before we get into it in proper detail. Murray, how are you? Did you enjoy that last night?
Yeah, same as Birch. Absolutely loved every minute of it, right from the start when Etzebeth smashes Liam Williams off that box kick, and you see some familiar pictures. And I was just so impressed with how the Boks managed to come out of their week of isolation last week. Most of their prep had been on Zoom with analysis sessions, but it just underlines how well prepared Rassie Erasmus and Jack Nienaber and Felix Jones and the rest of the coaching staff have this team, and their ability to go to an unbelievable level of physicality. As we heard in Chasing the Sun, they just love fucking people up, and we saw a lot of that last night. It was impressive to watch, and the Lions, perfect timing, I suppose, an awakening and a reminder of what's to come, because it was just incomparable to anything else they faced on the tour previously against Japan. It's a different ball game. It's a different type of rugby you've got to play, and Gatland's got a lot to think about.
He certainly does. I think everybody does after watching that one. That'll be the centre of attention of this podcast. We'll just reel off what else we'll be chatting about today before we kick off in earnest. So, breakdown law trials and independent concussion consultants. We'll get into that towards the start. The URC linking up with Jay-Z's boys, Roc Nation. That could be exciting, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that one, lads. Then we'll chat Lions in greater detail, and on the run-in, look back quickly on the Ireland under-20s, whose Six Nations campaign just reached a conclusion against France. Look ahead to Ireland's autumn tests, and if we have a couple of minutes to spare towards the end, why not chat about that brilliant second test between Australia and France? But I want to start, Bernard, with a question from Kalon, and this is a topic we were going to broach anyway after John Cooney's interesting media work during the week. If people didn't hear this or read this, by the way, he was basically, and I am paraphrasing, saying that at times earlier in his career at Leinster, he had issues with Johnny Sexton's communication style, let's say, and that it wouldn't necessarily be his cup of tea. And Kalon was asking, in light of the revealing John Cooney interview, how would you, Birch, deal with a similar situation in the squad? Would it be normal that some guys just don't get along? And have you ever had to deal with that in key positions like 9 and 10?
Yeah, look, I think everybody's not best mates all the time. I think once there's respect for each other, and you know that people are working together for the team, I think you have to allow that. So I would say, and that's why it's probably from a coaching point of view, in terms of recruiting coaches, it's so important you get somebody who's going to fit into the group, because you spend so much time together and you're a smaller group. Whereas with players, obviously you want to get a really good character, but generally players, you know, who are a little bit different or different personality, they'll find in a group of 44 or 5 players, they'll find, you know, a little group that they get on really well with, so you don't have to worry about them. Whereas coaching is it's a smaller group overall, and obviously you spend more time together. So yeah, I've had players who were you know, difficult at times, played with and coached them, but again, I think, you know, there's two things to it. You need to try and understand, you know, what's causing that anger or tension or fighting the system. So you need to try and, you know, get a little bit deeper with those individuals. And then also, if it's becoming something that's affecting the team's ability, then you need to probably speak to both parties and make sure they understand, you know, the personality type that they're working with. And you know, Stuart Lancaster is on the record of using personality profiles with the Leinster squad when he came in. So the coaches should have a better idea of how that player takes feedback, you know, how they take on information, to be able to tailor it, you know, the right tone to each individual. And that's obviously, you know, it's high performance coaching really. But again, I would say it's difficult for players to, in the heat of battle, to be able to, you know, react to a different player, you know, a different personality type, you know, in the heat of battle. I think most players will be true to themselves for those 80 minutes or for the 90 minutes on the training field, because it's the way training's gone now. It's not stop start and having big long time to chat. It's information, give it, take it on board and react. So, you know, the Johnny example, I mean, we know what Johnny's like, but Johnny's very authentic. He's like that. Does Johnny spend time trying to improve his communication style? Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure the Johnny that John Cooney would play with now will be vastly different. But also, let's be honest, you know, the 9 is the one in the firing line, and if there's probably 2 alpha males at 9-10, which John likes the game to be set up for in his way as well. So you can see the 2 very strong characters there. And let's remember, John hadn't proven himself in Leinster to the level he has now. So I'd have no doubt if he went back, it would be very different. But it's interesting to hear players speak about it like that. Look, it's not a surprise. I mean, you know, you're all like, what I always say is, you know, if you're coaching a team at professional level and you've got 45 players, since the age of 12, most of them have been the best player in their team, you know, and suddenly then at 24, 25, you're having to try and manage game time, manage expectations. It's quite difficult. So, yeah, it's definitely something that I think, you know, possibly maybe held John back a little bit, maybe his inability to deal with that, and maybe it affected his own form. And as he's matured now, you know, you see a player who's much more confident in what he can bring. And yeah, probably at a young age, he just wasn't really established enough to be able to deal with it.
Just to look at it from a slightly different perspective, Murray, as journalists, we probably come across it semi-regularly with certain players, I think particularly as it pertains to an international setup across a range of sports, where if they feel as though they're not necessarily in the coach's plans, they do tend to speak more openly and honestly about colleagues, even some of those coaches. And I wondered with Cooney, at his age, he's not old, but he's not exactly a spring chicken either. Has he reached that stage of his career? I think we've reached the F-bomb quota in this podcast, but the not giving a you-know-what stage of his career where he can speak openly and doesn't actually believe that he has a future playing alongside Sexton for Ireland. Did you get that impression, or am I reading a little bit too much into it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's pretty much resigned to not playing for Ireland again, and that's the stance he has on things. And you can understand it given his really good form over the last couple of years with Ulster and not getting a proper consistent look in with Ireland. You can understand why he would have that sense. And that is a shame that a guy with his skills and abilities as a as a threat from 9 can't be potentially integrated a little bit more. We've spoken about the depth there, and it'll be interesting to see what happens next in his career. Obviously, he's a key man in Ulster. I think he's got another year there in his contract, doesn't he? But you can imagine him absolutely bossing it for a French club in the top 14 and having a real kind of late career, I suppose, success somewhere like that. Obviously, Ulster want to keep a guy like that who they've built around a lot, but you could understand the resignation from his point of view. Some guys' faces just don't really fit, and that's been the case for him. It's definitely been tough. It was fascinating to see and read those comments I read in the Indo. Just honesty and a bit of insight and stuff you maybe heard mutterings about, but to hear from the player himself, it was fascinating. And no surprise, as Birch says, like, that's Johnny Sexton. We don't need to go through his CV. And generally, when you hear about that side of his personality, it's in a positive light from teammates who probably hated it at the time and wanted to deck him in training. But in hindsight, they realised that's why that team was successful, in part because of the incessant and at times aggressive demands on people to hit standards that he wanted to attain. So no huge surprise in that sense. But it is a pity, as you say, that Cooney's career with Ireland, in his mind, is probably over now.
Would the Indo be your go-to
just on
for
that,
sports coverage?
Gav, just on that. I mean, on that, like, what fans and journalists and pundits see on a Saturday for 80 minutes. I mean, it's cleansed, but like the really strong teams generally have a way of speaking to each other, holding each other to account, that if you said it in a normal office, you'd be in front of HR. I mean, that's just the way it is, and that generally, and maybe this is old school, and it's definitely got softer, but when the time is needed, you need to, like most, high performers want it straight between the eyes. What am I doing? What am I doing wrong? How can I get better? And, you don't have time to do a 360 review and spend a lot of time looking at your strengths first. It's literally just tell me so I can go do it. And that's what, Leinster was built on, to be honest. That's how they got it back ahead of Munster. I mean, when I joined 2005, we didn't have that level of accountability, and Cheika had to, like, really, really knock heads, get rid of some people, evolve other people, and make them be able to understand that before it started to get inbuilt. And even though they then had success, it didn't mean that you go away from that. The reason they were so successful for those 10 years is probably a lot of it's down to the way Johnny drove it, to be honest, and people listened to him. So it is really good to hear John Cooney's opinion, and absolutely, I'm sure it was very difficult for him. But the reality is, it's effectively how most of the top teams are operating anyway.
Yeah, fair enough. But it is worth stressing as well. He was talking about an experience a good few years ago. There's a question here about these new law trials, Murray. I'll throw it to yourself. It's from Emmett in the members rugby WhatsApp group, members.the42.ie, if you want to sign up and join the good folks in there. He says, World Rugby's new laws are set to come in for all competitions from the 1st of August, but the Lions' last test against South Africa is on the 7th of August. They're just going to ignore the new laws, right? So let's clarify that.
Yeah.
It won't feature in the South Africa test series.
The Lions series competition starts this month, so no, they won't. They won't have to jettison those in for the last test.
So talk us through those new laws. I think we've done enough on the 50-22 law in the past. We don't necessarily need to get into that again. But the new breakdown laws, and then we can get into, obviously, the independent concussion consultants as well afterwards. Yeah,
so the first one is clearing out players arriving at the ruck can't target the lower limbs, i.e. the legs of jackling players, which obviously is a real positive. You've seen some catastrophic injuries where people have kind of gone in off their feet, caught a knee in a horrible position, and there's been a major injury. I suppose what potentially the challenge for the game with this is, obviously the head and neck area is a no-go. The legs now are a no-go. So you've got a really small window for clearing a guy out. It's got to be their torso, obviously, or potentially their arms, pulling their arms away from the ball. So you've got to be unbelievably careful now, because there's massive scope for giving away a penalty. I actually chatted to Nigel Owens about this yesterday, And he said it really needs to go back to the jackal and really policing them being on their feet as they look for a turnover, because if that's not strict, well, then the arriving clear-out player has very little chance of legally clearing them out, to be honest. So that's one part of it. The other is around the latching. So no more pre-latched pods of 3 players or more, which again probably should have been refereed in recent seasons, but it has become a massive trend in the game, particularly in the 22s, close to the try line. Players pre-latched, hammering into defenders, creating those mismatches really in terms of power and also weight. You could have 300 kg more, up to 400 kg coming on top of 1 or 2 defenders, and that's been a really dangerous area of the game, as well as those players flopping off their feet, sealing off the ball, so there's no contest there for possession at the breakdown. The one player latch is going to still be allowed, obviously after the receiver catches the ball carrier catches the ball, and they can latch on, but they're going to be more strictly policed around being on their feet, again, not flopping onto the ground to block any potential jackal. And really it's a reiteration of what should have been refereed and has slipped out of the game in the last few years. Owens himself said it. He's like, the ball comes out at the back of the breakdown, you want continuity in the game. He said he was guilty of it. Let's just play on here. And that's the case with so many laws in the game, isn't it? You would have a bad product if you whistled absolutely everything, but a bit of short-term pain potentially and changing habits can make it safer and hopefully a better spectacle as well. That's the plan as well. But there's always unintended consequences. So I'll be interested to see how the referees actually police this now.
What are your thoughts on those new law trials to begin with, Birch?
Yeah, I think the breakdown one is going to be incredibly difficult for players to adapt to. As Murray said, the window or the space you actually have to hit is absolutely tiny now. If you think about, how slowly we've adapted to the head-high collisions, and how frequent do we see them, and if you look at a human body, I mean, the head is only an eighth of the size of some of the South Africans is probably a half, but it's of the actual target, and we're consistently hitting the area we're not allowed to hit, right? And you think of a jackal situation, like I would say probably more than 50% of the cleanouts, they involve hitting the legs and using those to destabilize the jackler. So it's going to be very, very difficult, and it's going to be incredibly hard, and it'll take a long time for players to be able to do that, because maybe they want to obviously have a lot more turnovers and transition, etc. And I can see that from a safety point of view, but I actually just think the practicality of being able to deal with that jackal threat is going to be very difficult. And I know everyone says, "Oh, you need to come in through the gate, you need to line them up, you need to get shoulder wrap, etc." This happens in a blink of an eye. And my fear would be is what you're going to see, which I think is more dangerous, is effectively pulling the jackler back, okay, basically towards your 9. So if you think about it, if you miss your target and you can't go for the legs, effectively all you can do is obviously you can twist left or right, whatever. But most times there's an assist in there clamped onto him, so that's not that easy. You effectively may have to pull the jackler back towards your own 9. Okay, and just think about the classical jackal position, which is ass up, head down. Effectively, for me, there's a risk then of that player going over on his head in a dangerous position. But we'll see how it plays out. As I said, the worry for me is that at the moment, I think more than 50% of the cleanouts involve some kind of contact at the leg area.
World Rugby are saying that the player advisory and coaching advisory group who helped put this together included people like Dan Levy, Sam Kane, Eddie Jones, Ian Foster, and you would hope that they're the ones who guided it with their first-hand experience. Obviously, Dan Levy suffered a big injury there, and Sam Kane has taken so much pummeling at the breakdown in the chase of a turnover. So let's see what happens with that. As you say, 50-22 is something we've discussed a lot about. But Birch, I'm sure you're not too happy to see the 5-metre scrum sequences done away with now, with the goal line dropout coming in across the board for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. It's come in, and I still think you can punish a team if you have a dominant scrum 5 yards out. I don't mind the goal line dropouts too much. I think the 50-22 thing, I know we've covered it before, but my coaching group has been reignited because of this. We have our first webinar tomorrow night. There's great interest in it, trying to work out how coaches can exploit it and defend it. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the people a lot brighter than me are going to come up with.
The consequences of that are potentially extremely positive if it works out as planned. You know, an extra body probably half policing the backfield with your 2 backfield defenders, fewer in the front line, a little less line speed and more space for the attack. But again, you have concerns about how it could go in terms of even more kicking into the 22, where when you're attacking the 22, you don't have much space at all. It's pick and jam. You have so much line speed from the defence. It's maul. And then you potentially get into a game where it's just kick and that 22 attack. The most exciting, I suppose, open rugby is played in the middle third of the pitch. And potentially teams are going to be looking for kicks there. But I am fascinated to see what Birch and the lads come up with and how teams are going to exploit.
Interestingly, Murray, I totally get where you're coming from, thinking, okay, another player in the backfield, less line speed. But ironically, how the conversations are just going on WhatsApp. Some of them, there's a strong push for increased line speed, okay, in terms of trying to affect the kicker. And make him kick badly, or make him shy out of the kick because of the fear of getting blocked down, like we saw last night from Farrell, even though it's not a 50-22, but just really actually focus on improving the player's ability to read body language, spot that potential 50-20 attempt, and then go after them, which I think actually could be a real positive as well, because obviously if they get a block down, that's, you know, we saw last night what can happen from a charge down. If they don't get the block down, you know, can that kicker sidestep? Does that open up an interval, a space, and then you're into kind of counterattack opportunities? So yeah, I think line speed sounds like it's a negative or potential negative, but I actually think it could open up more opportunities if teams are ready to exploit it.
It's fascinating. It's a big shift for the game. It could be a real turning point. So really interested to see from August onwards how it works.
Another shift then is the introduction of these independent concussion consultants, Murray, and it's certainly a positive step, it would seem on paper. Maybe the question would be, if you're doing it now, why weren't you doing it in the past? I don't know if I'm being unfair in asking that. Could you just lay it out to people at home, if they haven't read the articles about this or haven't quite caught wind of it, how it's going to work? Yeah,
I suppose the reason a lot of this is happening, there's a big push from World Rugby around player welfare at the moment. That obviously follows the lawsuit last season, the likes of Steve Thompson. We talked about it a lot at the time. Players diagnosed with early onset dementia and probable CTE, really horrific stuff. So World Rugby had to come up with some sort of response, and this is part of it. The new independent concussion consultants, who will be mandatory certainly for international rugby, if a player is attempting to return to play after a concussion within 10 days or on the 10th day after the injury. So like we've all had that experience of, like most recently, Luke Cowan-Dickey gets sparked on the pitch and a week later he's playing. Like 7 days, it'll never sit easy with me, even if everything is passed. And it just feels so strange to see a guy concussed and back 7 days later. This will add another layer. So if the team is passing the player fit to return to play after 7 days, the independent consultants can come in and assess that player. As well as that, it'll be mandatory for guys who are deemed higher risk in World Rugby's words. You're basically higher risk if you've been concussed within the last 3 months, you've had 2 or more concussions in the last 12 months, or the player's had 5 or more concussions since starting to play rugby. And again, we've all had those concerns around certain players who we've seen concussed a number of times and they return to play again. So this is just an extra layer. To me, it feels like a good measure, and it's independent. It's not the team who's obviously concerned, and the player themselves who just wants to be back on the pitch and just wants to be helping their team to win. It is independent. Obviously, there'll be friction points, I would imagine. Like teams' doctors will be thinking, who the F are you to come in and tell us and decide for us. But World Rugby has to do something around head injury and brain injury, given all that stuff that we discussed before around the likes of Alex Popham and Thompson, which is obviously massively concerning for the game.
That's probably the only potential wrinkle, Bernard, isn't it? I guess, internal versus external diagnoses and that potential conflict?
Yeah, it's going to be there's going to be conflict, but look at World Rugby need to be strong on this. I mean, there was huge conflict in France at the start when effectively every concussion had to be reported to a neurosurgeon in Paris, and he managed it basically. He managed players' game time, he managed players' return to play, but he was very good at educating the club doctors and building their confidence, and after a while it didn't become, I mean, effectively they were his messenger back to the coaches locally. You know, they stood strong together. So I think that it may start off being a little bit of conflict, but quite quickly, if World Rugby support it, and you know they build up credibility by making really sound and logical decisions, and are transparent and consistent, everyone will roll with it. I mean, it's for the safety of our players. So, yeah, I think it's a huge positive and well worth supporting.
Now, people from Cork of a certain vintage will remember Kanye West playing in the Marquee a couple of times in the 2000s. How far away are we from Jay-Z rocking up to Musgrave Park or the sports grounds? I would say still pretty far, but there is some positive news in the URC linking up with Jay-Z's management / marketing company, I think he described them, Roc Nation. And look, we've kind of said in the past that this competition, generally speaking, I mean previous iterations of it, was maybe a little bit poorly marketed or wasn't reaching the audience that it has the potential to reach. Roc Nation seems to be a company that really excelled in propelling its clients, both athletes and organizations, teams, into the mainstream consciousness a little bit more so. It feels like a step forward, Murray. We can get into the actual ins and outs of it a little bit, but were you surprised at all, or did it catch you by surprise, this announcement?
Yeah, I'd heard mutterings that there was something going on. They were going to bring in some expertise, which, as you say, was needed, and previously Pro 14 recognised that. It hasn't been a slick brand, in my opinion, and I think the stuff so far with the URC has been a bit slicker, a bit American for some people I know, but I think even the branding around it, the logos, everything, it looks a bit more professional. This is a good move to get marketing expertise in to help grow the profile of the league, and hopefully with new audiences. Like, they don't, our lads like us are going to watch it, but they want a younger audience, and Roc Nation will probably help them with that. The only thing I'd say is the most important part of any branding or marketing is the rugby on the pitch, and that's all that matters, really. That's what's going to engage people and get people really interested in the URC. The South African teams coming in will add to that, and you'd expect to see a bit of a bounce from the Welsh and Scottish teams after a few tough years as well. That's what really matters at the end of the day. But I do think it's a good move to bring in a bit of outside expertise, to recognise the flaws in your competition and try and do something about it. So I'm excited to see what they come up with, and hopefully it does help grow it.
Yeah, Birch, these guys are definitely no mugs when you look at their list of clients. Like, you're talking about some of literally the biggest sports stars in the world, but equally pertinently, some of the most marketable sports stars in the world that they have identified and approached to work with. And I think it augurs well that they are willing to work with the URC, as in they probably, like, there has to be gain there for Roc Nation as well. So they see potential in it and potential for its growth. Like, a little bit of background, I think this has come through CVC, but they have been making inroads in South Africa for quite a while. Sia Khaleesi was the first rugby player that they signed. They've got Cheslin Colby and a few more now on the books, as well as Mara Itoje. And then the co-CEO of Roc Nation and the head of Roc Nation Sports, Michael Yormark, was part of a consortium that bought a controlling share in the Sharks in around January time, as far as I'm aware. Now, people at home might think, well, the Sharks are part of this competition. Does that mean that they might be slanted a little bit more so towards the Sharks, or is there a conflict of interest? I actually think that's a good thing, because it means they were already pre-invested, if you like, in a franchise that's in this competition, and a rising tide lifts all boats. So I know you as well, Bernard, to be a man of significant social media savvy. We've just seen your analysis piece on the Lions in South Africa go nuclear on Twitter over the last hour or so. That feels like something that the Pro 14 might have been lacking a little bit. Just that, I guess, looking at other sporting competitions and how they're able to brand themselves now and reach some of the younger people to whom Murray alludes, it's social media is the key, really. And there probably aren't many better in the business to my limited knowledge at least, than Roc Nation of actually putting this product not just on TVs, which is kind of outside of the remit, but actually putting it on phone screens as well, and getting those younger people engaged in it to the point that they watch it on TV or go attend it in person.
Yeah, I think it's massive. I thought Jay-Z was Jamie Eastup's dog, to be honest. I'm way behind the times, but I know I have heard of Roc Nation, and I know that they're very much pushing the Sharks in South Africa. And look, I think that whatever we need to do to grow the game, and I think it is a massive step forward for this competition to be able to partner up with someone of that credibility. And obviously the next step is a title sponsor, and even I'm sure having Roc Nation involved will help with those negotiations. It's a new competition. It's probably coming off a low level in terms of credibility or respect. It's competing with established competitions like the Gallagher Premiership, the top 14, Super Rugby, even though that's changed a little bit. So yeah, I think it's really positive, and it's an ambitious step, but it's a hell of a reference point for them as they go, and obviously they have new TV deals. It just seems to be coming at the right time, and I want this competition to be a brilliant competition. I think, historically it's been a great place for young players to find their feet. And I think the new format will drive competition and will make it better. And if it's been branded in a better way, if it's been promoted in a better way, if there's more people, following these franchises, these teams, the regions in Wales, for example, if they can get behind, if the Welsh rugby fans can get behind the regions, not just the Welsh national team, it'll be hugely positive.
Yeah, hopefully. And it's an opportunity as well, an exciting one for players as individuals, you'd suspect, because if Roc Nation are looking to add to their roster, so to speak, of players, what better place to look than some of the provinces or the regions or the other clubs involved in the competition.
Yeah, just on that briefly, they are putting together a player advisory group as well, which is positive to see. This deal will involve that, so players get a bit of a say in how it's all marketed and branded and all that, and hopefully we see plenty more personality and players getting to show their character off the pitch as well.
Yep, exciting times. Exciting one as well last night. Let's chat Lions. And I've been actually racking my brains trying to think of where to start with this game. We'll talk about how great South Africa were in a moment, but Bernard, you've already looked through the game with a tooth comb, I've seen. From the Lions' point of view, a simple enough question to begin with, I hope. Where did they actually lose that game? Where did it get away from them? Where would you start?
They couldn't get over the gain line consistently. I think they got caught, smashed back in contact. Then the ball was slow. They tried to go after them in the high ball game, kind of like England did in the World Cup final, and Wales did in that semi-final. But South Africa are very comfortable in that environment. And while you will get the odd one back, they tend to win those battles hands down. And look at obviously the first try was a bit of a breakaway, but I really felt we allowed on a members podcast. I showed kind of how I feel that the South African philosophy is about pinning getting A zone entries, but not carrying into there, forcing the opposition, forcing the ball to get into that 22. And last night they didn't really veer from that at all. And I suppose what I hoped was, I would have felt Gatland looking back at his battles with South Africa, and he beat them 4 times, I think, before they lost in the semi-final. I think he would have felt a bit more power, which you get from having a combination team. We'll be able to handle them, and it'll be a lot easier. I think last night they'd be scratching their head in terms of, did they just have the wrong team out to be able to deal with that power? Or are they going to have to, or was it just the lads were a little bit off? They were too comfortable having had 3 easy games, were shocked by the intensity. Or are they going to have to think around tactically how they're going to play? So Gregor Townsend was stuck in Johannesburg, so they didn't have an attack coach on site. Felix Jones was stuck in Johannesburg, obviously in quarantine or lockdown. So neither team's preparations were ideal. But for me, the reality is you can't run away from that physicality. You're not going to be able to not carry the ball at the box. So you need to find ways of negating their power. So you need to be a lot more subtle. And I know the Lions will get. I heard Lions fans talking about, we found wit, we broke them. Like the only time I thought South Africa were under serious pressure was when they were down to 13. For that what seemed like a long period. And then the Lions looked really comfortable. But I think when they go back to 15, you're going to have to come out. You're going to have to be so accurate to get around it. But look, they tested it last night. They tasted it, that intensity, that closer from outside who's kamikaze. And maybe they just needed a sighter, and maybe just need to get the right ball players at the right depth to be able to get around it.
What about that, Murray? Lions finding wit. I probably had a similar impression got a similar impression to Bernard. I thought maybe like the areas where the Lions looked most threatening, even if it was 15 on 15, was just in complete broken field play, where it might be somebody collects a kick, just beats a man. I'm thinking of one Conor Murray little sidestep, and something might open up for Anthony Watson. But in actual structured play, they weren't making inroads. In the second half, probably resembled actually the Ireland 20s game that we might touch upon towards the end, in that it seemed like the more physically powerful team was just able to strangle the game, not just the opposition, but actually completely prevent them from making kind of an indent into their own defence. So from the Lions' point of view, from Gatland's point of view, how do you change that up? Like, is it more a change of approach, or is it a change in personnel that Bernard mentioned a moment ago?
Yeah, there probably is elements of both. And I agree with you. You think of, say, even the quickly taken line out from Daly to Farrell to Faletau, and they break up the left in the first half and they win a penalty off the back of that. The Lions probably had more of those moments where the Boks didn't quite have their structure. And that was off the back of a good kick, actually. They found grass in behind on the right, and Villy Leroux has to scramble a kick away. So definitely big elements of that. Like the Lions kicking game was hit and miss in the first half, I thought. Some real inaccuracies there on top of some good kicks and some decent pressure as well. That's got to be absolutely nailed on, because as Birch mentioned, the Boks kicking game is so pressurising. They're brilliant at finding grass or smashing you as you catch it. Their kick chase is unbelievable. Even Etzebeth, just watch him off the ball every single time. Every single player. It's actually wrong to pick out one. They all work so hard to pressurise you. And invariably, after an exchange of kicks, they usually end up in a better position. Like, the physicality is the big concern for me. The opening 40 minutes in particular, it was just on a different scale to anything we've seen in Test Rugby in the Six Nations. I honestly was surprised that the Boks could get back up there so quickly. I thought they'd need another game to maybe find their level of it. But it's just completely different to anything else in the world. All of their team, even missing a few big guys, are just physical savages. So I think personnel-wise, yes, that is going to be part of it. Like, I look at the midfield and I love a 10-12 combo, but I just think, geez, you have to stack two of your most physical centres in there and try and win gain line and deny them gain line, because they're so good at it. When the likes of Dialende, who hasn't played for weeks and just turns up like an absolute freak in terms of the physicality and his effort, his counter-rucking, everything, as well as the touches of skill that they all bring, you've got to find a way to match that. They've got Mbanambi to come back. Pollard's going to be at 10. Like, he's also a physical specimen who controls the game well. He can challenge the line. He can tackle. He'll add to that as well. And then definitely, just for the players who did play last night, there's probably more in them on that side of the game in terms of the bloody mindedness, the brutality that the Boks bring. This was the warning. Chatting to David Wallace before this tour, and he said, I'd played South Africa many times, but in 2009, when we hit the Test series, they just went to another level of outright physicality, and you've got to match that. The Lions were caught cold in 2009, that first Test. They've got their, I suppose, warning on that front last night, but I definitely think Gatland will be thinking, how can I get the most power possible into my team? Because that's what the Boks bring. What they do is simple. It's exactly what we would have all predicted last night, how they played, but like, stopping it is altogether another story. You've got to be unbelievably accurate around the set piece, and Gatland was encouraged by that. Like, he's really pressing the fact that he thought they had scrum dominance. They had some big moments there. Obviously, the 5 metre scrum one for Wyn Jones, who did really well. Some massive maul defence at key times as well from the likes of Itoje Henderson, Adam Beard off the bench. They'll be heartening for the Lions, but they've got to go up another few notches on that.
Yeah, I have a question on Beard that I'll get to in a moment. Bernard Murray mentions the midfield kind of struggling a little bit, and probably in reality, if you expand it out a little bit, 9, 10, 12, 13 as a sort of a pretty wide axis didn't get much going. And I want to ask you about Conor Murray's performance. Generally speaking, he's coming in for a lot of flack. That tends to be the case anyway after Conor Murray performances. But it was striking watching the game. Sometimes with Farrell, he seemed to be dropping about 10 yards deep purely to get a kick off. And I know you've looked at how South Africa have actually managed to pressurise the kicker in that type of an environment. But all of it seemed to stem from the breakdown ultimately, in that the age-old tale of if your halfbacks are playing behind a pack that's being driven backwards, they're on a hiding to nothing essentially.
Yeah, and the Springboks set the tone early with a great counter ruck after about, I think, 10 or 15 minutes, which would unnerve, Conor, the 9, and then obviously every time he set up to box kick, they're pulling guys in. It's not new. We laud Itoje for doing it week in, week out, or doing it for England, but they did get to him a little bit. His box kicking wasn't too bad. It's just we weren't really able to do anything back, and we didn't stay patient, and that was the big thing for me, around the second try from everyone's talking about, don't kick the ball to Kobe, Cheslin Kobe. Like, obviously that's obvious, but I think Conor should have took control of that himself. I didn't see Elliot Daly screaming for it. I didn't see a clear overlap. And quite quickly he shifted it to Farrell, who shifted it to Elliot Daly. The ball was brought back into his 22. He couldn't kick it off, and obviously there was big pressure from Peter Steff. I thought he got a decent kick actually, because he kicked it down to 15. So the worst case scenario there is he kicks it long down the middle, and they have two sides to attack. So he probably did as well as he could. But that's the kind of thing that Conor needs to. And it's a one moment, so it sounds very harsh, whatever. But that's where he's there for. He is there to make sure we're unbelievably controlled, and he did it the first time. From the little chip over the top from Mornay Stain. He played an extra phase. He got our kick chase organised, and then obviously when they kicked it back to us and there was a bit of a fumble, and Navidi and Faltau end up on the ground, I thought that's when he needed to play another phase again, and that's the battle. And when you look back at Wales in South Africa in the semi-final, Wales tried to stay patient. They tried to stay patient, but they lost so many of those little battles that effectively the tide turned and South Africa got a narrow win. And there's another example is when, from that scrum, Mornay Stain, kicks it long right, and great chase from Kobe, and Rhys Sammet kicks it out on the full. That's a massive win. It doesn't seem like anything, but it means that they go 50 metres up the field and get a line-out attack. And that's the challenge for Gats, is to find the power, to find the flair, but also find 23 players with a really low error count, in the face of incredible physicality and pressure. It's not an easy challenge. I mean, I don't know what the bookies are saying today, but I know the Lions were slight favourites before last night. For me, the Boks lay down an unbelievable marker. When you think that, I think Bongi, Malherbe, Lude, and maybe Sia and one of the Dupree brothers still come into that pack, or certainly come into the match 23, which isn't going to depower them in any way. And in the backs, I think Pollard will start, and Mbimpi probably come on the wing. Like, they're going to get stronger. When you look at the Lions group, okay, yeah, there's obviously talent to come in there, but given the fact that what they have to come in, plus the fact that you would expect those players logically to get better for that game, and obviously someone will get game time this weekend, it's pretty daunting.
It was interesting to see them Birch take on the tap penalties. Like, when the Boks are down 13, you think, obviously just go for the scrum. At the time, I'm thinking this must be a tactical thing. And Gatland said afterwards, yeah, that was actually what we planned to do so that we could get a bit of practice with the trench warfare. I don't know if that was the case or it's an easy explanation away from it. What was your sense of those moments? Because, like, the Boks review, look what we did to these guys on our try line for 5 minutes when they're desperately trying to score. We absolutely bossed that. It was a massive psychological blow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see the logic, because the Lions will want to prove to themselves, you give us field position 5 yards out, we will be relentless. We won't let you off the hook. We will just keep the ball. We'll do an extra on it. And if you look at the technique that the Lions brought, I mean, like, it wasn't it was pretty decent. Like they were taking their time, they were getting their latch in, things that would normally result in a try. And so I think that the problem with when you go for that and you fall short, I mean, it's a tiny moment, but like not getting that score, going in at half time, you can imagine the Boks just going, right, like we have these fellas. And look at, obviously in hindsight, you take the scrum. I think the Lions, I know Gats is trying to say that, we were dominant there. I thought it was a lot of 50-50 calls, to be honest. I don't know if we're dominant at scrum time, or we will be throughout the series. So I sensed that maybe they felt it was too risky to go for the scrum there, even though, look, they should score off it. Well, obviously with them being 2 men down, but you also would think you pick and go, and you score without any risk. With the problem with playing, out the back or going to the backs there, just that rush. So I think that's in Farrell's head, that's in everyone's head, not to call the ball from Murray, because I haven't seen the behind screen or whatever, but they have to be unbelievably narrow, to be able to defend those pick and goes. Only have 2 players less. There had to be in space, but I think that's the beauty of that kamikaze rush, is that sometimes it makes the backs over rely on the forwards in those situations, because you don't want to get caught 10 yards behind the gain line and smashed. So you leave it to them, but then if the forwards don't have the power to manage the way over, well then it's a huge swing. So it's going to be interesting. As I said, I didn't see anything technically really wrong. I just thought it was sheer physicality. I think, look at Gatland and Gregor Townsend, I'm sure they'll be saying, let's not give them that chance to recover. Let's take the scrum there and let's find a way of attacking that space that's obviously somewhere. If it's either through the scrum, if they go with 7 against 8, or if there's space in the backs, well then we got to be good enough to go take it first phase.
It was just such a good passage of rugby. I'm getting gleeful here thinking about going back and watching it now, to be honest, again.
Yeah, well, the thing is, Murray, I actually don't enjoy that normally, because it's a foregone conclusion that the attack will win. You know what I mean? The attack will be play off a penalty advantage, and eventually they'll get over. But it was probably one of the most impressive defensive sets on your own goal line. There's probably better examples in terms of having to make good decisions. Like literally all you had to do was put on your body armour there and throw yourself at it, but they did it over and over again.
It had to have been pre-planned though, Murray, didn't it, to go for the tap and go when they were down to 13, because they did it on the other side of the break as well. And you'd imagine if it was a poor decision in the first half, you'd be getting an absolute bollocking for it in the second half. You wouldn't do it again. But I have seen it used. Sorry. But I have seen it used as a stick with which to beat Conor Murray's leadership and things like that. And I don't mean to sound like I'm picking on him, but there are kind of calls now in the UK, probably from certain quarters of Ireland as well, for a change at scrum half based on the pace of play or the speed with which the Lions were able to attack or unable to attack maybe more accurately. Is that something that you see as a possibility, or are people being too harsh once again on Conor Murray?
Yeah, I don't think that's the most important aspect of it. I think it's what Burns mentioned about not making mistakes. And again, Gatland said afterwards, we should have box kicked in that example. Their strategy would say they should box kick there. It was an override call and they went with it. It didn't work out well. But Conor Murray does have an ability not to make huge mistakes. Ali Price has done well in this tour, but who's he done well against so far? The opposition hasn't been strong. I think he's kicked well, he's passed well, he's defended well actually, and he was obviously good in the Six Nations. But Conor Murray probably has more credit in the bank with Gatland, and obviously he respects him as a character and personality to have made him the tour captain. What might actually work out in Conor Murray's favour is if Alan Wynne-Jones completes this remarkable comeback. And obviously, it's tough to hand over the tour captaincy again, but maybe that bit of pressure off his shoulders can allow him just focus in on his game and his decision making and his role, rather than concerning himself with what he's going to say for beforehand or at halftime to the rest of the team. Alan Wynne-Jones is on the bench for tomorrow, or for Saturday rather. He's straight back in there, which is a surprise. They said he was going to have to isolate for a few days. Apparently that's not the case anymore. And Gatland says he's 100% fit, so he's going to put his hand up for test selection with 20 or 30 minutes off the bench. It's an absolute remarkable story, and will probably have some sort of effect on Conor Murray as well.
Bernard, how the hell has this happened with Alun Wyn Jones? Like, Conor Murray described it as unbelievable a couple of times in his post-match interview immediately after the game on Sky, and I actually think it literally is unbelievable. I cannot believe it.
Yeah, I don't think he obviously didn't have a full dislocation. No. And I do remember at the time Gatland saying they were going to take they're going to treat it a lot more aggressively than you would with a player who's a bit younger. So obviously this Lions tour is absolutely massive in Alun Wyn Jones's career. So, and let's be honest, he's played more than he's going to play. So potentially they went at it a different way. As I said, but the most outstanding thing is that he's back. And I just saw some footage of him training with Wales, and he was giving it a good test. So. It's a massive boost. I think the psychological stuff that's going on now, and Rassie being the one to leak that the first one to say Alun Wyn Jones is coming back, and now Gatland being asked about Rassie being a water boy, and Gatland saying, look, he should carry water, and it's just, there's going to be a load of things. And Rassie looked so happy last night. I mean, it's just it's fascinating to have your director of rugby on the pitch, giving instructions. We know that it was a huge part of them winning the World Cup, having Nino Bar being able to do it. But I think the next week is going to be amazing. And Alun Wyn Jones is just another chapter in the story.
I thought Rassie soaked himself on there at one stage when Dweeba comes off just before half time. He kind of gives him a high five and jogs onto the pitch. He would have absolutely loved it. The glee he gets, and there's definitely value. I mean, Gatland's point is fair. He's obviously not a water boy in any way, shape or form. Obviously, Nienaber is a physio as well, so that was his in. It's a quirk, but I enjoyed seeing Rassie's mischievous smirk on the sideline. He's always got something up his sleeve. He's always having a little bit of a cut, saying the Lions are scared to play them with their physicality again this weekend, and it adds a massive amount off the pitch.
Well, Gatland should call a spade a spade. Like, it's all well and good complaining about Rassie doing that. It's there for him if he wants it as well. The option is there. It's just he doesn't have the legs. He doesn't have the legs to do it. Nah. Let's call a spade a spade.
He wouldn't have the stamina.
Do you think it's something that will catch on, Bernard, in all seriousness? Like, do you see other coaches replicating this? Rassie's done a lot right in the last 5 or 6 years, so...
Well, look at it. I think from a personal enjoyment point of view, like, he actually is able to influence the game, and he's right down there at pitch level, a hell of a lot better than being at a desk looking at Excel sheets. So I can understand why he would do it. In France, it's the way. If you're not down on the sideline, animated, debating decisions with referees, you're not a good head coach. So look, I don't see it going that way. I think it's a very unique situation in terms of with this current management of Nino Bar and Rassie, and it's going back a long time in fairness with them. Obviously with Rassie, or with Nino Bar being a physio that Rassie made a coach, effectively he's always had his eyes and his ears on the field. He's always been able to make absolutely sure they could get a message in with someone who understands it, who's got the same language, same mindset as him, and now he's just flipped it. You know what I mean? But I don't think if Gatland or a Joe Schmidt or an Eddie Jones, if that isn't how they've operated, I don't think they're gonna go down that route. So I think it's an anomaly, but I think it's intriguing. It's just funny seeing him there. He's just so engrossed in it. It's brilliant.
It really is. We have a question here about Alun Wyn Jones' partner in crime at lock from Mick in the Rugby members WhatsApp group. Has Adam Baird put himself in the conversation for being in the 23 for the first test? I'll throw it to yourself, Murray. And Mick adds, he had a cameo yesterday but stole a line out and really disrupted 2 or 3 line out mauls on the Saffers. In fairness to you, Murray, I remember when Beard was called up, you were one of the first people that I saw in Ireland, at least, to outline how impressive he had been in the Six Nations, whereas the rest of us were probably more so aghast at James Ryan's snub. Yeah. So what did you make of his performance last night, and can he work his way into Test 23?
Yeah, really impressive again. As the comment says, loads of disruption on both sides of the ball. Actually, he was good, and he has great skill set. He's a big unit, obviously, brilliant on maul defence in particular, and kind of continued what he has been doing or had been doing in the Six Nations. Gatland mentioned afterwards that the bench is going to be a huge part of this. I'm not sure whether he was alluding to Alan Wynne-Jones or Beard in that sense, but he did have a real impact, and that is exactly what you want. I definitely don't think it's crazy to think of Beard going all the way into a 23. However, there is strong competition there. Like, Ian Henderson has had a good tour, and he had a brilliant Six Nations as well. So if you're looking at a scenario where Alan Wynne-Jones makes this incredible recovery, starts beside Itoje, I think Henderson will have to be included probably in the 23. It gives him a nice headache, gives him nice options. And Beard has done everything he can. He gets another go on Saturday, and who knows, maybe that'll be a decisive say. But for me, I think Henderson probably just ahead of him in the pecking order.
Looking ahead to the weekend then, Murray, before we wrap on the Lions, we'll stick with yourself. What stands out to you about that team to play the Stormers? I think we kind of know how the game is going to go, or we suspect it will go a certain way. So who have you got your eye on mostly in that lineup?
Well, Robbie Henshaw's back from his hamstring injury. That's been real frustration for him. And interestingly, he's at 12, maybe pointing into the fact that they are going to kind of beef up that centre partnership. Himself and Daly in midfield will be an interesting combination. Stuart Hogg as well gets a go finally. He's been in isolation after being a close contact of that positive COVID case in the management group. So he has a last chance really to put his hand up in a very competitive back three. And then at 9, I mean, we spoke about Conor Murray, Ali Price has an opportunity to again have that final say. It's a nice position to be in here, a week out from the first test. So if you have a massive game and really impress Gatland, you've still got plenty of time to recover ahead of a test. So he said there's about 60 or 70% of his test team still to be decided in his head. Now, I'd be surprised if it was really that high, but there are definitely a few where, just like the rest of us, we're kind of going, like, who is he going to pick there? Even at loose head now. It's such a battle. Vunapola's best appearance off the bench. Sutherland has been really good, and Wynne-Jones, as we said, really good in scrum and also around the pitch. He can jackal well. So there's loads up in the air, and that's why it's fascinating for Saturday. Like, literally everyone involved is still potentially in the mix.
And finally, on the lines for the moment, Bernard, you kind of touched upon it earlier in the show, or you hinted, if you were to put your money on a team to win this test series, based on what you've seen last night and based on the statement that the Springboks A team made, who's your money going on?
Yeah, I was massively impressed by the Boks last night, and I just think, you know, they've just continued what they built at the World Cup. They're going to stick to the same fundamentals, and it's going to be harder for Gatland to try and get, you know, a playing philosophy to beat them than maybe I thought. I'd hoped that they were going to be a little bit match shy. Obviously, the Southern Hemisphere based players, but last night was so impressive. Just quickly to go back to Rassie needing to be on the field. Rassie's always been a coach who's given very strong direction. So you hear a lot about player ownership, coaching, you know, leave decision makers to make your mind up, make their mind up, and we'll review it afterwards. They get a manual, and they get told what to do in every situation. And that's how South African players in general, certainly the ones I've coached in France and Wales, that's how they're brought up. It's very much game by numbers. And even, I don't know if some fans will know this, but when Rassie was coaching the Cheetahs back in the Currie Cup, he took a spot high up in the stand, and he developed a traffic light system. So when there was a scrum, the 9 or 10 would look up, and the colours that he flashed would give them the call he wanted. So he's like, that's why it's so important to this coaching group for either him or Nina Bar to be on the field, because they literally do call the plays when they can, which isn't common elsewhere. But just thought, yeah, so people need to understand where Rassie's coming from and how he sees, you know, his influence as a coach.
I can't wait for this test series. My own hype levels have peaked, I think. Before we leave the two of you go, lads, a couple more things to chat about. We did say we'd touch upon the under-20s. We'll stick with yourself, Bernard. You were in the RT studio for that game, and I thought you did an excellent job, actually, of just summing up the fact that no matter what happens for these players as individuals for the rest of their careers, they'll always have this summer of 2021 when they formed a kind of a bond that we don't see many teams form, particularly teams that are pretty, like, that are kind of Like, they're not playing together day in, day out, week on week for the year. Like, it is an international setup. It is a kind of an amalgamation of the best players in the country at that age group. And yet they seem to have this chemistry and a will to play for each other that was evident towards even the dying embers of that France game that should have been long gone, similar against England. So whatever about finishing third in the tournament, which was fine, and a couple of really impressive performances, it seemed like a nice tournament for those players as just individual guys, and a memory to have forever.
Yeah, I think so. I think they did us incredibly proud. I don't think it was the most talented group we've had. Some injuries affected that, but they were unbelievably difficult to play against, and they just hung in there and fought, in the teams that outpowered them, and in the teams that they were probably had more ability in, or are more talented, more experienced. They dealt with them quite convincingly and played some good stuff. But I just think, for Richie Murphy, Leamy, Tucker, and the other coaches, they'll be absolutely delighted with how the tournament went, and it looks like they've created a really good environment for them. I thought Kinsella, obviously, his performances were outstanding, but I just think he showed a level of maturity as a leader that you rarely see it at that level, and I'm excited to see what he can do. Post this age group. There's a couple of lads back next year, but yeah, I think overall they can be very proud of their efforts.
Yeah, you'd imagine Kindellan would have been pretty key to that team environment, Murray. But as Bernard touches upon there, it's equally Richie Murphy, Dennis Leamy, and all the support staff who actually facilitate an environment like that for it to be cultivated. And that augurs well for future iterations of the Ireland 20s as well, that there does seem to be this, this encouragement of a sense of team. Not that it wasn't there before, but it was just so evident this time around.
Yeah, absolutely. Some really good coaching, and it's been an important development avenue in that regard, as well as the players. We know that a lot of them are going to go on to bigger things, but you've seen Nigel Carolan, you've seen Noel McNamara, who's going off to South Africa with the Sharks now. They've taken steps in their career by leading really impressive Ireland under-20 teams. And Richie Murphy's been, I suppose, in the shadows with the senior men's team as the kicking and skills coach for many years. And now he gets a chance to be a head coach, and with some real success as well. There was a nice cohesion to Ireland, as you say, a really good squad kind of spirit as well. So really pleasing in that regard. Agree with Bernard. There was the likes of Kendall who really showed they can move on to the next level. He just seems so mature. He plays like someone who's older than his years. And a couple others there who will definitely see in senior rugby in the next year or two. Obviously disappointments against England and France, not wildly unexpected, to be fair. And they managed that game against Italy that could have got away from them really well in the second half. There was a lovely bit of calmness and composure and poise to their performance there. So all in all, a really enjoyable campaign again. Like every year, the under-20s rugby is some of the best to watch, and I know I can't wait for the next group to come through.
Yeah, for sure. Well done to them all. It was a pleasure to watch them over the last few weeks. Looking ahead, the All Blacks. It's too soon, Bernard. It's too soon for me. I know it's been a couple of years, but I actually am not ready to watch Ireland play the All Blacks again. Are you excited? A little bit more excited than I am? Yeah,
look, it's lovely to... I think we're going into it on the back of obviously 2 good wins. I think, a lot of the youngsters showed up really well against Japan. I think that's against America. That's a real USA. That's a real positive. And yeah, I'm excited by it because I'm looking forward to this new competition domestically, and to seeing where the team are. I'd like to hope we made progress with the national team. Obviously, Johnny being out gave Carberry some game time, and I thought he had some bright moments. I think Coombs will be the 8th by the time we play the All Blacks, and I'm excited to see his development. Doris is outstanding. It's going to be good to test ourselves against a team who play completely differently than we're going to face in the Six Nations. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Like the Lions is going to be my priority now for the next couple of weeks, but I think it's a nice one to have on the radar.
I don't ever ask you for hype levels, Murray. What about that Ireland All Blacks game? Where are you on the scale?
Yeah, buzzing. There's a trip to Las Vegas a couple of weeks before that as well. So hopefully things are normal and we can get a good trip for the pod over there. Maybe we can do a live show. I'll start campaigning for that if you're up for it, lads. It's a nice...
that's good, yeah.
Honestly, members.the42.ie, members.the42.ie. That's what'll get us over there. Your continued support and even more support from those of you who aren't members yet.
GoFundMe
Japan
page.
coming back to town. Collection box. Come here. Japan are coming back to town as well. We need to mention that. And that was an absolute thrilling game a couple of weeks ago. You'd imagine, even actually with Japan having got a bit of rugby into their boots, so to speak, over the summer, like they'll come back into that autumn series for themselves in better stead, and that should be a tasty one as well.
Yeah, they're here to stay, Japan, at the top table, and they're one of the most attractive sides to watch. There's going to be really excitement around that fixture. Definitely the All Blacks one is always special. And I don't think, like, I'll probably be proven wrong, but I don't think it is the strongest All Black squad ever at the moment. Even looking at their teams to play Fiji, I haven't been blown away looking at it on paper. And Fiji really put it up to them last week. They'll get better. They'll improve as the year goes on. Of course they will, but you never know. Ireland beating the All Blacks at home would be a nice achievement again. And Argentina as well will be an interesting test, something slightly different again to mix up the regular humdrum calendar that we've had, particularly in the last year where you've ended up playing people a lot of times. So it is something really to look forward to, and fingers crossed we just have a full house or near to it at that stage. It makes some bloody difference, doesn't it? Even the Lions games like last night would have been even better with a full house full of crazy fans. So fingers crossed come the autumn tests we'll be at that stage.
100%. To round it off, I know you both watched, or I presume you both watched, Australia and France during the week. And listen, there's a lot to be said for midweek rugby. I think we've discovered that probably over a few Lions stories, to be fair. I noticed in the aftermath of that match and France's victory, a lot of people praising them as being almost like a second string French team that had turned over the Wallabies, set up this third test decider. But Murray, I kind of thought that was more of a third string in ways. There were guys there that were probably fourth choice in certain positions. It didn't feel like... I actually thought second string was downplaying their performance and the achievement of winning.
It's scary, their depth at the moment, isn't it? Even someone like Jackman, who's played in the Pro D2 with Perpignan all season, he nailed 8 from 8, didn't he, off the tee? Really composed moments off the kicking tee. So they've got players coming out of the woodwork from left, right and centre, young guys who are athletic, who've got good skill sets, and after the absolute disaster the previous weekend showed a bit of mettle to get over the line this time. It has been a wonderfully entertaining series. The Wallabies obviously will have massive regrets about this second one, and realistically France could be 2-0 ahead, which says so much about this squad minus all those frontliners. But I can't wait for the decider on Saturday. It's been brilliant so far, and I'm all in for Tuesday and Wednesday kind of mid-morning rugby. I'm just all over that.
Yeah, it's been absolutely a joy over the last couple of weeks watching those two sides. Bernard, which way would you be leaning for that third test? I know there are a lot of variables probably with lineups and things like that, but on a hunch.
Yeah, I'd probably expect the Wallabies to find a way to win, but I think the France are getting so many positives out of this, regardless if they win the series, to barely lose one, the first test, to win the second, to develop some more depth. I mean, I thought Wacky, I've seen glimpses of him for Bordeaux, for France, but I thought that was his most complete performance. And Galtier must be just, so happy in terms of the feel-good factor that's there now, the relationship with the clubs. I mean, in that under-20s team, I know, speaking of Mike Prendergast, the captain, the 9, the Gallic, he's 100% sure he'll play for France at senior level. There's just depth there that we I'm not saying we're in a bad place, but they have really turned the corner. When you think back 5-6 years ago, it was so reliant on foreign players. The national team were in disarray. It's all looking very positive for them, obviously with a home World Cup to look forward to in 2023.
Yeah, it's really exciting for France, probably a bit frightening for the rest of us, but then as frightening as it might be, it's always just enjoyable when they're on song, isn't it? So it could be an exciting few years for sure. Murray, give us an idea of your schedule for the members over the next couple of days before we wrap.
So we've got another newsletter coming tomorrow, a bit of analysis, and we have a post-match pod on Saturday, video analysis review on Monday, and another newsletter on Tuesday. So there's loads going on. It's a great time to sign up, obviously, and just so exciting. Like, everyone's fully in on this Lions tour now, aren't they? It's what we needed, that kind of kickstart. And all the permutations of test teams, etc. So looking forward to giving people a bit of extra coverage with the membership.
Yeah, members.the42.ie. You get access to all of that, plus all of our other podcasts and offerings. You can read about them at that very link, members.the42.ie, and sure, you can decide then. Bernard, thank you as always. Great to see you.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you next week.
And thank you, Murray.
Cheers.
Thanks to everybody at home as well. Enjoy the rugby over the weekend, particularly Lions Stormers. Enjoy Murray's analysis as well. And we will be back on one of those days that Murray mentioned, or indeed for non-members, in this regular slot next Thursday. So until then, mind yourselves, take it easy.